Ahmed Hussein al-Sharaa was born October 29, 1982, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He is the current president of Syria, assuming office in January 2025. Known by his nom de guerre, Abu Mohammad al-Julani, al-Sharaa's journey from militant leader to head of state marks a significant transformation in Syria's political landscape. Ahmed Hussein al-Sharaa was born in 1982 in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, to a Syrian family originally from the Golan Heights. His family, like many exiled Syrians, lived as part of the large diaspora in Saudi Arabia, where conservative religious values were deeply embedded in the social and political environment. Ash-Sharaa grew up in a middle-class household with strong Sunni Muslim traditions, and from a young age was exposed to pan-Islamic political thought through local mosques, religious study circles, and satellite broadcasts of prominent Islamist preachers. In his adolescence, his family relocated to Damascus, where he completed his secondary education. During this time, he was reportedly a quiet and serious student with a growing interest in theology, politics, and the Palestinian cause. He became active in informal Islamic study groups and was influenced by the rising discontent among Syrian youth over government corruption, authoritarianism, and foreign intervention in the region. The 1990s were a politically repressive period in Syria, marked by Hafez al-Assad's iron grip on power, but also a time of rising Islamic activism in response to the regime's secularism. Though not yet affiliated with any armed groups, Ashara's early years were shaped by a growing sense of disenfranchisement and a worldview steeped in anti-Western and anti-regime sentiment. This ideological foundation, combined with the regional shockwaves caused by the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, would eventually push him toward militant jihadism and his entry into al-Qaeda in Iraq, marking the beginning of his transformation from religious activist to insurgent leader. Ahmed Ashara's ideological development in the 1990s and early 2000s was shaped by a potent mix of personal experience, regional turmoil, and exposure to rising Islamist discourse. Growing up between Saudi Arabia and Syria, he absorbed two contrasting realities: the strict Salafi-influenced religious environment of the Gulf and the secular authoritarianism of the Syrian Ba'athist regime. These experiences deepened his sense of alienation and reinforced his view of the Assad government as both repressive and religiously illegitimate. In Damascus, al-Sharaa began attending informal religious circles led by underground clerics who quietly opposed the regime and advocated for Islamic revivalism. He was also influenced by cassette sermons and writings circulating at the time from figures like Sayyid Qutb, Abdullah Azzam, and later Osama bin Laden, whose ideas combined political Islam with revolutionary militancy. The suffering of Muslims in Chechnya, Bosnia, and Palestine, broadcast through emerging satellite networks like Al Jazeera, intensified his identification with a global Islamic ummah under siege. These influences helped crystallize his worldview that Muslim-majority societies were failing because of secular rulers propped up by Western powers, and that only armed struggle could restore justice and Islamic governance. By the early 2000s, the U.S. invasion of Iraq served as a galvanizing moment for many like Ashura. It appeared to confirm his belief in a Western-led war against Islam and offered a clear front line where ideology could be translated into action. This fusion of local resentment, religious conviction, and a global jihadist framework would form the ideological core that propelled him into al-Qaeda and eventually shaped his path as both a militant and later a political leader. Ahmed al-Shara's involvement with al-Qaeda began in the early 2000s, during a period of intense regional upheaval following the US-led invasion of Iraq in 2003. Drawn to the ideological call of jihad and resistance against Western military presence in the Middle East, al-Shara joined al-Qaeda in Iraq, the group founded by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. At the time, al-Qaeda in Iraq was one of the most violent and hardline branches of al-Qaeda, known for its brutal insurgency tactics and sectarian violence. Ashara's role within the group is not extensively documented, but reports indicate he was active in organizing local cells and facilitating attacks on U.S. and allied forces. His intelligence and commitment earned him recognition within the organization. In 2006, he was captured by American forces during counterinsurgency operations and detained in Camp Bucca, a U.S.-run prison in southern Iraq. This facility notoriously became an incubator for future jihadist leadership. as it housed many radical figures who later formed the core of both al-Qaeda and ISIS. During his imprisonment, al-Sharaa deepened his ideological beliefs and forged connections that would shape his future. He was released in 2011, coinciding with the eruption of the Arab Spring and civil unrest in Syria. Upon returning to Syria, he used the experience, networks, and militant discipline acquired during his al-Qaeda years to establish Jabhat al-Nusra, the official al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria. For several years, Sharaa remained a committed and high-profile member of the global al-Qaeda movement, publicly declaring allegiance to its central leadership and aligning his group with its broader goals. However, internal ideological disputes and strategic disagreements, especially over local governance versus global jihad, eventually led to a split in 2016 when Ashraf severed formal ties with al-Qaeda. His tenure in al-Qaeda was foundational to his development as a militant strategist and future political actor, providing him with both the legitimacy and organizational skill to later become one of the most powerful figures in Syria. By 2016, Ahmed al-Sharaa, then operating under the nom de guerre Abu Mohammad al-Julani, was facing increasing pressure both internally and externally over his group's affiliation with al-Qaeda. As the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, he had successfully positioned his faction as one of the most effective rebel forces in Syria, but its open ties to al-Qaeda were becoming a political liability. Western and regional powers were reluctant to engage with a group formally aligned with a global jihadist network, and within Syria, rival rebel factions and civilians alike were growing wary of the consequences of hosting an internationally designated terrorist organization. Realizing that maintaining the al-Qaeda connection could ultimately isolate and endanger the group, al-Sharaa made a calculated strategic shift. In July 2016, he publicly announced the dissolution of Jabhat al-Nusra and the formation of Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, claiming the new group had no affiliation with any external entity, an explicit and implicit break from al-Qaeda. This move, however, was met with skepticism, as many viewed it as a superficial rebranding. In early 2017, to further solidify the shift and absorb other Islamist factions, he oversaw the formation of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a broader coalition dominated by his loyalists. HTS adopted a more Syria-centric agenda, emphasizing governance stability and administrative control over jihadist expansionism. The group established the Syrian Salvation Government to manage civilian affairs in territories under its control, especially in Idlib province. Ashraf's break from al-Qaeda marked a significant turning point in his ideological trajectory, from a committed transnational jihadist to a leader increasingly focused on pragmatic governance and territorial control. While critics argued the ideological shift was more tactical than genuine, it allowed HTS to emerge as a semi-state actor within Syria and laid the groundwork for Ashraf's eventual rise to national leadership. Following the formation of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, in 2017, Ahmed al-Sharaa made the strategic decision to move beyond the traditional role of a militant faction and begin constructing a functioning governance apparatus in Syria's rebel-held northwest. Recognizing that long-term survival and legitimacy would require more than battlefield success, HTS spearheaded the creation of the Syrian Salvation Government, SSG, later that year. Based primarily in Idlib province, the SSG was framed as a civilian administration, but it operated under HTS's oversight and influence. Al-Sharaa positioned the government as a solution to the administrative vacuum in opposition areas, organizing ministries responsible for education, health, justice, agriculture, and infrastructure. Schools were reopened with curricula tailored to conservative Islamic values. Hospitals were supported by local taxes and donor funding, and a court system based on a hybrid of Sharia and customary law was implemented. HTS also controlled trade routes, border crossings with Turkey, and humanitarian aid distribution, giving it economic and political leverage. Though normally separate from HTS, the SSG functioned effectively as the civil arm of Ashraf's movement. This system enabled HTS to portray itself not as a terrorist organization, but as a viable governing authority, capable of maintaining order and delivering basic services where the Assad regime had collapsed. However, critics, including international monitors and rival opposition factions, argued that the governance model was authoritarian and dominated by HTS loyalists, with limited room for dissent or genuine civil society participation. Still, for many residents in Idlib and surrounding areas, the HTS-SSG structure became the de facto government, providing a relative sense of stability amid the chaos of the wider war. This shift toward governance was a key factor in al-Shara's long-term strategy to position himself as a national leader rather than just a rebel commander. In the final months of 2024, Ahmed al-Sharaa and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham launched a bold and meticulously coordinated military campaign that would culminate in one of the most dramatic shifts in power in Syria's modern history. Years of attrition had weakened the Assad regime, which was increasingly isolated, facing growing internal dissent and struggling to maintain control over key cities amid mounting economic collapse. Exploiting this vulnerability, HTS forged temporary tactical alliances with smaller rebel groups and leveraged its disciplined and battle-hardened forces to mount a multi-front offensive across central Syria. In rapid succession, HTS-led forces captured Aleppo, Hama, and Homs, overwhelming demoralized Syrian Arab army units and capitalizing on local unrest in each region. Their advance was fueled not just by military force but also by political messaging. HTS distributed propaganda emphasizing liberation, justice, and national renewal, attempting to cast their campaign as a second wave of the Syrian revolution. The final and most symbolic objective, Damascus, fell in early December 2024 after a brief but intense urban conflict, during which regime forces crumbled and many defected or fled. On December 8, 2024, President Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia, leaving behind a vacuum of power. al-Sharaa immediately moved to secure key state institutions, broadcast a message of victory, and announced the beginning of a new transitional phase. His forces raised HTS flags over government buildings, but he refrained from declaring a formal Islamist state, opting instead to convene the Syrian Revolution Victory Conference, where he was officially named president the following month. The speed and decisiveness of the campaign, coupled with the collapse of Assad's authority, marked a stunning reversal of fortune for al-Sharaa and positioned him, after years on the fringes of global jihad, as Syria's new ruler. Following his appointment as president during the Syrian Revolution Victory Conference on January 29, 2025, Ahmed al-Sharaa moved swiftly to consolidate his authority over a fractured and war-weary country. Understanding the fragility of his legitimacy, both domestically and internationally, he announced the formation of a transitional national government, tasked with overseeing a 5-year stabilization and reconstruction phase. To project inclusivity, he extended offers of cooperation to various non-HTS factions and independent technocrats, though real power remained tightly held by HTS loyalists and security organs under his direct control. One of his most significant political moves was a landmark agreement with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, enabling the integration of their military units and administrative structures into the new Syrian state, an unprecedented step aimed at national reconciliation. Al-Sharaa also initiated reforms in the Syrian Salvation Government, rebranding it as the Civil Administration of the Unified Republic and placing it under tighter constitutional oversight. His administration reopened key trade routes, reestablished basic services in urban centers, and sought diplomatic engagement with regional powers, including Qatar, Russia, and China, signaling a strategic shift from isolation to realpolitik. Despite these outward gestures of pragmatism, dissent was carefully suppressed. Independent journalists, rival clerics, and former regime officials who refused to align with the new order were sidelined or detained. In parallel, al-Sharaa deployed a media campaign to reshape his image from jihadist commander to nationalist reformer, frequently appearing in public with clerics, tribal leaders, and technocrats. By mid-2025, he had succeeded in establishing a semblance of centralized control over much of Syria, though questions about the durability of his rule and the sincerity of his ideological transformation continued to shadow his presidency. As of mid-2025, Ahmed al-Sharaa stands as the most powerful and controversial figure in Syria, a former jihadist leader who has rebranded himself as a national president, presiding over a war-ravaged but newly unified state. His rise from the insurgent fringes to the presidential palace has astonished observers and unsettled regional powers, many of whom remain uncertain about how to engage with a regime born from a hardline Islamist movement. While he has achieved short-term stability and imposed centralized control across much of Syria, his government faces immense challenges: reviving a shattered economy, managing post-war reconstruction, addressing deep sectarian and ethnic wounds, and navigating a complex international landscape where sanctions, distrust, and diplomatic isolation still loom large. Internally, skepticism lingers among both secular opposition groups and former regime loyalists, many of whom fear a return to authoritarianism under a new ideological guise. The integration of Kurdish forces, while a diplomatic breakthrough, remains fragile, and any misstep could reignite tensions. al-Shara's greatest challenge may be transforming his rule from one based on force and revolutionary zeal into a sustainable political order accepted by a diverse and traumatized population. Whether he can evolve from a battlefield tactician into a legitimate statesman, or whether his government will fracture under the weight of its contradictions, remains one of the most consequential questions for the future of Syria and the wider Middle East.